Good morning. Sue Smith sitting in for Elias. Elias will be back with you tomorrow. And it's an exciting day in Quebec politics because Premier Legault is testifying at the Gallant Commission. Apparently, the first time in 15 years that a sitting premier has testified at a commission. We are going to continue monitoring that for you, but we are, we're going to play you some tape as it comes. Right now, as we've been telling you, he's been pretty much throwing the transport minister under the bus. So we'll check in with Tom at the bottom of the hour and find out about the ongoing testimony. Right now, another kind of interesting conversation that's been a bit contentious in Quebec is secularism, which we know is important to Quebec. The current CAQ government has taken several measures to strengthen secularism in the province. And this fall, they say that they will go one step further by banning public prayer. And that is one step too far for the Archbishop of Montreal. Christinne Lépine published an op-ed in La Presse this week reacting to the government's plan. Archbishop Lépine joins us on the line. Good morning.
Good morning.
So what do you think about the government's proposal to ban public prayer?
Well, there's a distinction between the state, which has a responsibility towards the whole of society. So the state cannot call itself secular or laicist, but the society itself is pluralist. So the state is there to at the service of the whole of society with all its components and dimensions, and so in that sense, secularity cannot be about making the whole of society secular, because it's serving the society as it is. So that's why the freedom of expression, I think, is very important, and freedom of praying is part of the freedom of expression.
You wrote that it is an infringement of basic human rights.
Basic human rights. I like to go back to the UN Declaration of Human Rights. One of the first articles says right to life, to liberty, and to security, and they go hand in hand. And so it's the liberty, freedom of expression, freedom of thought, freedom of expression. And praying is part of the freedom of thought and expression. So I think it's very important. And in the end, it's about allowing everyone to have a sense of community, being able to express what they're living, but at the same time in the context of public order, public peace, which is very important also.
I guess I'm wondering what the distinction is, and I mean the government is making this distinction between private prayer, which you're talking about, and yes, of course, everybody should be able to think whatever their private thoughts are and pray if they want to, and public prayer. Is there a distinction for that in your view?
Well, freedom of expression and freedom of prayer cannot be only about private prayer or expression, because the idea of freedom is freedom in the whole of society. So it's a freedom of expression in the public sphere also. And if we look at the Declaration of Human Rights of the United Nations, it's all explicitly. There's one article where they explicitly say private and public. So your fundamental human rights, they have a private dimension, of course, but also they have a public dimension, which is very important, but also in the context of peace. It's not the freedom to do anything. It's freedom is also linked with responsibility towards peace and public security. So, but the public dimension is part of the fundamental human rights.
How will this affect the Catholic Church? How often do you have public prayer?
Well, a couple of times a year. It's not something that is done often. Most of the time, it's in the churches. Once or a couple of times a year, there'll be an event, whether a procession in the street or something in a public park or a public square. But it's not something that is regular, because it's about being practical also. But there are sometimes we want to be more public, and sometimes we need more space. And it will be so. It's not something that comes up often. Mm-hmm. But the principle himself is to have this free, to have this sense that we can live. Everyone can live his faith serenely in the society that we are, and I think that needs to be protected.
I guess I'm just trying to get a sense of how that will affect the public life. You mentioned in your article, the Pope's visit, for example, Easter parades, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
How concerned are you that those kinds of things would fall afoul of this kind of legislation?
Well, let's say we can have a public event in the public arena a couple of times a year, but in the end, it's the spirit with which we are. So, do we live in a society? It's about democracy. So, do we live in a society where all the rights, the fundamental human rights, are respected in the public sphere? And it gives us to have a spirit of democracy. And I think it's about the events themselves, whether it's once a year or 10 times a year. But it's also a sense of what kind of society do we want. If we want a society with the fullness of the fundamental human rights, it also involves the freedom to pray and to think and to express oneself. And if that is it's not and it's part because a global view of the person. There's a spiritual dimension, the physical dimension, psychological, relational dimension. So the human being, as he is, with all of his dimensions, needs to be recognized as within the whole of every dimension together in the public sphere. So it's a global respect of democracy beginning to be a global respect of the whole of the person in the public sphere.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we're seeing that around the world, but it's interesting here because it seems that the government proposed this ban after there was a tension over Muslim prayers that took place in front of the basilica, which are some say disrupted the peace. What are your thoughts about those kinds of public prayers?
Well, I've talked with the pastor of the Basilique Notre Dame, and for him, everything was peaceful. There once or twice a few events of individuals went at the door of the church, but the vast majority, if not everyone, the whole group as a group, they were in the public square. They were not in the street. They were in the public square, and they were expressing their pain over Gaza and their thirst for peace. So, and that's where they were. They wanted to. So it's okay. So the pastor was very at ease with it, and we know that Gaza is a very difficult situation and conflict in the Middle East. So, and somehow for me the important thing is that what is the violence that comes from elsewhere does not come to Canada.
But I guess the government is saying you can demonstrate, but you can't pray.
The idea would be, why say you can't pray?
Yeah. Why do you think? Why do you think the government says that?
Maybe I don't want to guess why they do that, but whether it's let's say to say you can pray, you cannot pray, but you can yell. What's the point? You can. You can gather together. You can express your views on different topics, and but doing it as respectfully of peace and public order. Normally, the way to do is to ask the city and to facilitate the work of the police, to have an internal way of organizing people, and so that to diminish the work of the police, and so. When that is done, it's people are who they are, and they express what they are, their pains or their joys or their sufferings or their requests. And the public dimensions means we live in a society where every pain, every dimension of life can be expressed. And some might disagree, some might agree, but that's not the point here. It's about this freedom of expression is the beginning of dialogue. Without no freedom of expression, there's no dialogue. We just impose silence on people.
All right. Archbishop Christinne Lépine, thank you. Thank you for making that point and joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
That is Archbishop Christinne Lépine. He is the Archbishop of Montreal, talking about this idea that has been floated. Actually, the government says it's going to do it, by Jean-François Roberge. He is the minister responsible for secularism, that as of this fall, public prayer of all sorts will be banned in Quebec.